I'm Dinky, and today I'm gonna teach you a few things about style. The Linux ecosystem is ever growing, and so is its user base. It's no longer just for the few or for the niche. No, Linux is for everyone. It is also for you. And the longer you do use Linux, you will realize it has an immense ability to be customized. And in this guide, I'm gonna teach you how to make a Linux rice that looks like this. It's true. And most importantly, teach you how it's done from scratch. That way, you'll be able to gain inspiration and the knowledge required to continue ricing your operating system and make things look nice and personal. This video will have many chapters, as some of the things that I'm gonna go through are things that you might already know. Although I suggest sticking along, you might learn a thing or two still. Anyhow, without further ado, let's move on to chapter 1. I will answer this question just for you. An entire operating system is made from multiple components. One such component is the kernel. The kernel is what facilitates communication between your actual physical computer and the software that runs on top. Many groups of people and organizations have used the Linux kernel to make entire operating systems. These are called Linux distros, or distributions for short. Few examples are Arch, EndeavourOS, Debian, Les. One distinction that's important, however, is that Linux is open source, and as such, it's completely free. When you install a Linux distro, such as Ubuntu, for example, you will get to choose to install it with a desktop environment, or a DE for short. There's a few different kinds of DEs. Examples are GNOME, KDE, XFCE, Cosmic, so on and so on. But really what a DE is a collection of components that make up an operating system front end. These components range from the core windowing system, which allows apps to create windows, and other things such as a login manager, file explorer, settings menu, all that stuff. But when we speak of ricing Linux, we usually speak of hand-picking all of these components ourselves, including the core windowing system that we want to use, such as Wayland or X windowing system. And for that, we don't want to use complete desktop environments. No, we want to use tiling window managers. And one of the most important things is, of course, you can customize them a lot. So when we speak of ricing Linux, we speak of installing a tiling window manager of your choice, installing all of the applications you want, such as whatever file explorer you want, and you'll design everything to look exactly how you want it to look. That's what we're gonna do. For this guide, we're going to use EndeavourOS. Endeavour is essentially Arch, but with a few pre-installed components, and it also has a very nice installer. It makes it easy to use. We're going to pick Sway Window Manager because it's Wayland-based and not X-based. We only use Wayland here. We're going to use Wofi for the application launcher, EU to create our custom widgets, Waybar for the taskbar. For the terminal, we're going to use Kitty. And the file explorer that I've chosen is Nemo. All of these things are personal choices. They're my preferences. However, I think they're good to start with, and they're also very themable. So I recommend you try them out if it's your first kind of rice. All except for EU. EU is kind of difficult to use. We're definitely gonna glance over how to configure EU as well. If you don't care about the guide and just want to install the rice, then you can go to the installation chapter. If you're not new to Linux or ricing, then you may indeed skip this chapter as it will include great detail. I'm going to go to the EndeavourOS website, download an ISO file for the operating system, and then burn it onto a USB stick. You can do this by using programs such as Rufus on Windows or Balena Etcher on either macOS or Linux. Personally, since I'm on Linux, I like to use the dd command, like this. You may also use the raw ISO file to create a virtual machine of the OS if you don't want to install it permanently on your computer. We're going to plug the USB stick into a computer and boot from it. You will indeed be greeted by a live view of the operating system running directly from the USB stick. And here we get to choose to permanently install it. You will simply follow the steps and configure the settings. For this guide, we will start off with the GNOME desktop environment. That way I can show you how to install Sway alongside it. After the installation is complete, we can restart our computer and behold EndeavourOS with the GNOME. Now we're going to install all of our software that we want to use for our RISE. This command will install most of the necessary softwares as well as Visual Studio Code, so we can easily edit the config files. Alas, some programs cannot be installed with Pacman and will have to be installed from the Arch user repository, which is a community of people that maintain unofficial software. To make this easy, we will install the Yay package manager. Git clone this URL, go into the directory, and write this command to install Yay. We will use Yay to install EU, which is another software that we will need. When we restarted our computer, we were greeted by this screen. This is called the Login Manager, and GDM is the default logging manager that comes with GNOME. We want to be able to switch between GNOME and Sway with the Login Manager. Therefore, we will need a new Login Manager that supports this. For this video, we're going to use LY, because it's lightweight and easy to configure. We will install it as such. We can now disable the default GNOME Login Manager with this, and enable LY with this. But before we restart the system, let me teach you something rather important. If we open the terminal and visit this directory, we can see the config files for GNOME and Sway. These are the files that LY and other logging managers will use to detect which desktops are currently available. We can use the cat command to see the contents of the Sway config file. Here, you see the execution command is simply Sway. That is how you enter Sway. We can edit these files to change how the login managers launch either GNOME or Sway. This is relevant because if you're on an NVIDIA GPU and use proprietary drivers, you will need to edit the Sway file as such. We can do this by simply opening and editing the file with Visual Studio Code. If you use an AMD GPU or open source NVIDIA drivers, you don't need to do anything. It is also likely that this step will become entirely unnecessary in the future. I use NVIDIA, so I'm gonna edit and save the file. And now I can restart the computer. This is what LY looks like. As you can see, it's very simple. We can switch between Sway and GNOME. I will, however, not enter Sway and once again enter GNOME. Before we switch to Sway, we need to get a basic configuration file for Sway done. All programs that need configuration files will store them in the .config directory, under your current home directory for your user. Each user will have its own separate config files. Here we will create a Sway directory and create a config file with the name config. We will open it with VS Code. Sway stores the default config file in this directory, so I will open a terminal and print out the contents of that default config file. I will copy it to our new config file. Now, instead of writing everything from scratch, we can just edit this default config file, which has a bunch of good defaults. The important things we need to get done here before switching to Sway or before rising is making sure that the default applications are the ones that we've chosen. On this line, you can see that they've set the default terminal to foot. We will swap this with Kitty. Here, they've set the default menu, which is the application launcher, to vMenu. We will change it to Wofi by adding this line. We also want to add our file explorer, so we will set the file explorer by creating a new variable to Nautilus. We also need to create a key binding to launch the file explorer. This can be done with this. Note that this keybind, mod plus E, is already chosen for something else, so I'm just gonna delete it. The keybind that uses mod plus E by default is unnecessary, so this won't have any implications that are important. You can see that the keybind to quit an application here is mod plus shift plus Q. That is annoying, so let's just change it to mod plus Q. This is how you can edit the config in order to change the keybinds to your own preferences as well. The mod key is set here. Currently, it's pre-configured to the super key, or the Windows key as some people call it. This is a good default. I recommend not changing it. You can read more about how the syntax for the config file for Sway works on this documentation page. We've now set the default applications and made Sway at least usable. We can now restart and enter Sway. These are the basic keybinds that are important to know. If we hit Mod plus Enter, we open a terminal. Mod plus D, the application launcher. Mod plus E, the file explorer. We can open the application launcher and search for Firefox, for example, and launch that. Mod Shift Space to pop the window to floating mode. Mod and left click to move it around. Mod and right click to resize it. If you visit the GitHub page of this RISE, you will also find a document containing all of the default keybinds. Refer to this if you forget any. The system is very laggy right now, and the resolution is all messed up. That's because we need to set the default settings for the monitor. We're going to write this command to get all of our monitor data. This will display all of the necessary information. Uncomment this line and replace it with the details for our monitor. You can, of course, have multiple monitors. For example, a dual monitor setup would look something like this. Save the file and then refresh Sway with this key combo. We now have the basics of Sway setup. Not beautiful, but it's functional, and it uses all of our default applications that we've chosen. So let's talk about rising. This RISE will be themed around a retro-futuristic aesthetic. It will be modern and simple, but still have lots of tasteful elements. Of course, all the files are available on GitHub, so you can always refer to the individual files if you get confused or if you want to copy-paste lines of code. The files on GitHub will be formatted differently and more eloquently, and they will include concise comments. I have selected a few main colors to revolve this RISE around, and found some nice references for the main idea and theme that I want. After we have the main concept figured out and the colors selected, it's time to start working on the RISE. First, we will set up Sway. We're gonna customize things such as the borders, the gaps, and set a temporary wallpaper using Sway BG. That way it simply becomes a bit more easier to see. All of these customizations will be made in a way where they match the overall design language and aesthetic that we've chosen to go with, in this case, retrofuturism. We've edited Sway to actually make it useful and functional, but let's actually make it look good now. The first thing I will add is gaps between and outside of the windows. This is done like this. Then I will add window borders. I will set them to be 1 pixel each. If we refresh, you can see the changes take effect. Now let's set the border colors to match our theme. Sway syntax uses this scheme for the window border colors. A window can be focused, focused but inactive, unfocused, urgent, for instance if you get a notification, and placeholder. Placeholder is a little thing that will show up when you move a window. The colors are represented from left to right in hexadecimal format. The border color, the background of the window, the text, the indicator, and the child border. Some of these aren't used. For example, the text would be used in a title menu, which we don't have enabled. Once again, the syntax for Sway config can be figured out by reading the i3 documentation. But you can simply use common sense, or tweak things and see what changes. That's the best way to learn. We will be adding these hex codes that are part of the colors we've picked for our theme. As always, you can find this entire code block on the GitHub page of this RISE and copy-paste it. Or choose your own colors if you wish. When we refresh Sway, we can see the changes take place. Far from beautiful, but it's one step closer. The GitHub page I made for the RISE contains wallpapers that I've also made specifically for this RISE. I want to set the wallpaper to one of these. I'll create a directory called wallpapers and pictures. This line of code shows how we can set a wallpaper, so let's just modify the directory to be the image we've just downloaded. After refreshing, you'll see the wallpaper. It makes it easier to have a background For Sway, this is the extent of customization we can do. There is, however, one thing we can do which will immediately elevate the entire look, and that's customize Kitty, the terminal. We will go to .config and open up the Kitty directory with VS Code. This directory should exist by default, as some config directories are created automatically. If it doesn't exist, you can simply create it with this. Inside the Kitty config directory, I will create two files, kitty.conf and theme.conf. For the theme.conf, I will simply copy-paste the code from the relevant config file on the GitHub page of this Rise. I'll do the same with kitty.conf as well. As you can see, most of the code is simply setting the colors, which are values that I want to adhere to our design system. I won't waste any time by showing me manually inserting colors. These config files are tiny and should be able to be easily understood. Here you can see that I've chosen the Maple Mono font. This is a font that I cherish and will use throughout this Rise. So let me teach you how to install it. Go to the Maple Mono GitHub repository and download the latest version. Extract the files and move them to this directory. This is the global fonts directory. Since it's global, you may need to use sudo, as it's outside of the scope of your user. After we've moved the files, we'll refresh the font cache by entering this command. And that's it, we now have the font installed and it can be used anywhere. With the config files for Kitty saved, we can create new terminals. And as you can see, the colors of the terminal match our Sway border colors, as well as the wallpaper as well. It already adds a lot to the Rise, and it will look even better once we have the other elements made. Speaking of which, we're gonna start working on the taskbar, which we're using Waybar for in this case. On our taskbar, I've chosen that we should track the active workspaces, things such as having a clock, the tray bar, so we can view our currently active applications, as well as volume and things like that. Sway has a default taskbar by default, which you can see at the top of the screen. If we open the Sway config file, you'll see this section, bar enclosed by curly brackets, with a bunch of code inside of it. We're going to delete the contents and instead write this. This will launch Waybar and refresh it as well whenever we refresh Sway. Now, when we refresh Sway, you'll see a different looking taskbar. This is because it's using the default config files for Waybar. Nothing that we want to use though. So let's go to our .config directory and create a directory called Waybar. Here we're gonna create two files, config and style.css. The config file will specify the layout as well as the data for our taskbar, such as what kind of elements we want to display on it, whether it's the workspaces or the clock, so on and so on. Whilst the style.css is what we'll use to style it, make it look however we want it to look. The config file uses the JSON format, so that's what we're going to adhere to. I've added this block of code. This stuff will specify things such as the position of the taskbar, margins, and stuff like that. Whilst these three lines specify what things we want on the left of our bar, the center, as well as the right. Waybar divides the taskbar into three sections. First, I want to track our workspaces to the left side of our bar, so I'll add this block of code which will set the details for our Sway workspaces. This works because Waybar automatically supports Sway along with other window managers. You can read more about this on the wiki. We can now add this to the left of our taskbar by appending it to the array of strings on module's left. On the center, I want to create a new custom element, a button that launches the application launcher. Custom elements can be made like this. The custom denotes that it's a custom element, and whatever is to the right of the slash is an arbitrary name. I've named it App Launcher. Inside this block, I'll add these lines. The format is an arbitrary text that will be displayed inside of the element. The on-click is whatever will be executed when we click the element. And the tooltip is the tooltip. As you can see, the on-click will launch Wofi. I will, however, make it a bit more complicated by doing this. This essentially makes it so when we click the button when the application launcher is already open, it will close it again, instead of opening another instance. This essentially makes it a toggle, which is very nice. I will in fact add the same behavior to our sway config file as well. This way, if we spam mod plus D, it will simply open and close Wofi instead of continuing to open more instances. Anyhow, we can now add custom/app launcher to the module's center. On the rightmost modules, I want to add a bunch of things. The network info, the battery in case you're on a laptop, the volume, the tray bar, and a clock. Each and every one of these elements are things that Waybar supports by default, so they don't need to be custom. I'm not going to explain every line of code in detail, as I think common sense with some reading and analysis should be enough to understand this code. A lot of things here, such as the text on the app launcher, to the clock being 24-hour format, are things that you can and should customize to your own preference. If we save the file and refresh Sway, you will see that Waybar has adopted a new layout, but it doesn't look good yet. That's where the style.css file comes in. So let's proceed to edit the Waybar theme. Note that I will not explain CSS syntax, as that is outside of the scope for this video. As always, feel free to copy-paste things from the GitHub page. I will add an all-encompassing scope first and set basic details. I'll set the font to Maple Mono, since it's lovely. Border radius of 9 pixels. And I'll set the background to be transparent. This is because I want to specify the background of each element separately. After this, I'll set the style for the overall window of the taskbar. This is done with the window selector. If we refresh, we can see the results of our labor so far. For a lot of the sections of our taskbar, such as the clock, the tray menu, or the workspaces, we want to use the same background color and the same style. So I will create a general scope that adds all of these elements. This is something you can do in CSS. Then I will set the background image to our lighter dark color, add margins that match our border radii in a way that looks clean by using this formula. I'll set the foreground color to our selected foreground color part of our theme, and also set a transition duration for our animations. If we refresh, we can see that our design is starting to take shape. I will also add a separate scope for the clock here and set the margin right to 6 pixels. It's in this manner where you edit the style for the taskbar with Waybar, but I won't show you every single thing I will add because the point of this is that you learn how it's done and then learn how you can do it yourself. These are the rest of the styles, all following our theme. You may copy the code blocks from GitHub and read the code at your own leisure, and of course customize things as you see fit. I recommend reading Waybar configs of different rices on GitHub, as they may teach you a lot of things and also inspire you. This suggestion should be applied to all programs and software that you may use. This is the culmination of our Waybar design, but if you notice, pressing the application launcher button quickly snaps us out of our design philosophy. Which brings us to our next point, the application launcher. We've chosen Wofi, which allows you to open up a little window and search for the app you want to launch. Much like Waybar, it uses a CSS-like language to theme it, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. We're gonna theme it to match our current aesthetic. Much like Waybar, we're going to create a config file and a style.css file inside of the Wofi directory, inside.config. The theming process here is almost identical to Waybar, except the config file is a lot simpler. I'll set the terminal to kitty, the default location to the center, set the width, so on and so on. You may customize things here as much as your little heart desires. For the actual design, we'll edit the style.css. Like in Waybar, I'll add an all-encompassing scope and set the font. Also, much like Waybar, I'll create a scope for all of the windows and set the details. By experimenting and creating something that matches the style of our design language, we can create something that is cohesive and something that looks nice. This is the outcome of our labor, and now our system is starting to take shape. Lest you get carried away, however, I must show you something. If we open up our file explorer, you may notice it doesn't adhere to our theme at all. If we press this to open up our volume panel, you'll notice it as well does not fit our theme. This conundrum brings us to our fourth topic. The fourth thing we will do is theme our GTK theme. A lot of applications use the GTK toolkit to create the UI. and GTK uses a theme that's global. As such, file explorers such as Nemo will be themed according to the current system-wide GTK theme. We're going to use the themix editor, which you can install to create a GTK theme. And we're going to set the theme that's currently active with the dconf editor. We will install themix with yay, and install dconf with this. After we've installed these programs, we will open the themix editor. And for once, there is a user interface that allows us to edit the theme, well, for now anyways. I'll simply set the colors to match our design language, then export the theme to our local .themes directory, which is where the GTK themes should be. I'll open the dconf editor by entering this in the terminal. Yes, this is how we'll have to open the dconf visual editor. I will search GTK-theme, which will bring up the fields, and in each one I will enter the name of the theme we've just created. If we open up Nemo with the application launcher, you may behold our theme in action, which matches our design language. Alas, there is a glaring issue. Opening up Nautilus, which is the file explorer we've chosen, yields us this result. Opening up the volume editor gives us this. What is the reasoning behind this shameful display, you may wonder? And the reason is that themix only creates themes up to GTK version 3.2, whilst these and many other apps use GTK 4 and greater. Creating GTK 4 themes will require us to create files and edit them, and creating a GTK 4 theme just happens to be a very extensive task, one that is beyond the scope of this video. I have, however, created the GTK 4 theme that matches this design aesthetic. You can get it by git cloning the repository of this rise from GitHub. Drag the GTK theme to your .themes folder and use that. Or download another GTK theme that you like altogether. Now when we open up Nautilus, it will use our theme because this GTK theme is one that supports GTK 4 as well. Yes, as you can see, making sure that applications are themed to our liking can be an extensive task. For instance, we can even go beyond GTK. Spotify can be themed with Spicefy, Discord can be themed with Vencord, and many other applications can be themed. But for our core features that are part of our OS, the GTK theme is one that will be general enough. A good tip is to prioritize GTK-based applications. Whilst it may seem underwhelming that I couldn't show you how to create GTK 4 themes here, by understanding what GTK is, you'll gain the necessary knowledge to actually customize the theme yourself. For now, you can use the provided GTK theme. We've got a lot of things done now. However, there's a thing that's missing. Strictly speaking, you don't need this step. It is something I like to do. It is a slightly more complicated thing, so you can skip it if you want. But I'm talking about the widgets. We're going to use EU for the widgets, and EU is a relatively powerful toolkit. It lets us create anything from menus and taskbars and widgets. However, EU can also be quite daunting at first. It uses a more bespoke language along with a CSS-like language, and setting it up can be a bit weird. However, I'm going to quickly glance over how everything is done, and you can download the EU configs I've made. I will take the liberty of doing a live demonstration and showcase of EU, mostly as a quick glance over. The first thing you'll have to do is, of course, download the EU config files. This can be easily done by either cloning or downloading the repository from GitHub. After that, as per usual, you would drag the EU config files into the EU directory inside your local .config file. There is no EU directory by default, so you can just drag the entire folder. Now, after we have the directory installed here, we'll have to actually set up Sway to use EU. EU has to be launched, and we're going to have to launch it from Sway. If we go to the scripts directory in EU, you will see a bunch of scripts, including start.sh. This is what we'll have to call from Sway. Here, I'm going to add a line of code. Exec always. This will execute a command every time we refresh Sway. The command that we're actually going to run is the start.sh config file. If we refresh Sway, you won't see any widgets. Sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't. This entirely depends on your monitor setup. To fix this, we'll have to open up the Sway config files with the VS Code. The .yuck files are bespoke config files to EU. As such, they're a bit difficult to explain because nothing really looks like this. But an important thing to note is in the EU.yuck, every single element will have a monitor tag. This is the monitor, and this is what you'll have to change. For instance, instead of number 2, I can have number 0. And if I refresh now, you'll see a widget. It's in this manner where you can move the EU widgets to specific monitors. I'm going to apply this change, setting the monitors from number 2 to number 0 on all of the widgets. And now when I save, you'll see all of the widgets move to our main monitor. These default widgets do two things. The first section simply displays the date. And above, there's 3 buttons. The first one opens up the terminal. The second one opens up the file explorer. And the third one toggles a power menu. You can change things such as the anchor. For example, here, we can instead set it to center. And now, one of the elements is moved to the center. EU is a bit bespoke, and it's a bit difficult to get the hang of, but by reading the config files and the documentation, you'll get the hang of it. I recommend playing around with the values here and seeing what changes. It's in this manner where you can learn and customize it yourself, and eventually also learn to create more advanced widgets. So here we've got our rice, all of the files available, including the wallpaper, and I hope you've learned a lot of new things, including how to customize your own OS. So you don't care about the guide, but want to know how to install? I don't judge you. Step 1. You need to install your Linux distro of choice. Step 2. Install all necessary software to use the rice by entering this command in the terminal. This will differ greatly depending on which package manager your distro uses. This rice does also support Hyperland if you want to use that instead of Sway. Step 3. Create a directory for GitHub repositories and write this command to clone the repository of this rice. If you don't know how to use Git or don't care, you can download manually from the GitHub page as well. Go to the config directory in the GitHub repository and copy all of these directories to your local .config directory. If you want to use the alternate version of this rice, which looks like this, you will need to use Hyperland or SwayFX. If you do decide to do that, use the alternate config files instead. Step 4. Launch Sway or Hyperland. This is done either by using a login manager like ly or by doing it raw in your terminal. Sway is launched like this, and Hyperland is launched like this. Step 5. Edit the config files. Things such as wallpapers and monitor resolution will have to be edited and set up manually by you. If you open the config files of Sway or Hyperland, you'll see that I've commented with detailed descriptions on how to do this. It's in this manner you install this rice and any other. A Linux rice may be a never-ending project. As you grow, you're going to probably customize it more and more, iterate on it, maybe create a new rice altogether. However, I recommend you always save your config files somewhere, such as a GitHub repository. That way it's never lost. Linux rising at its core is its design and its art, and lots of people publish their own rices online, including the config files. So you can really get a lot of reference for rices and how different softwares work. And along with references, you can learn how every single toolkit is used by looking at the config files of various people. I myself have made a specific video about a rice that's utilizing the Frutiger Aero design language. I recommend watching that video. Now, proceed and live your life in a style of your own choosing, whether it's the OS that you use, the art that you create, the attire that you adorn, or the words that you utter.